The bruises on her arm told a story she would never speak aloud. When Eleanora Blackwell pressed her gloved fingers against the stagecoach window, she was not admiring the landscape. She was counting the miles between herself and the man who had turned her father's home into a prison. 3 weeks of dust and distance and sleepless nights on hard benches, and still she could feel his grip on her arm like a phantom limb of pain that refused to let go. She had 3 choices left in this world: marry a stranger, return to hell, or die trying to survive alone on a frontier that swallowed women whole without even the courtesy of a gravestone. What she did not know, what she could not possibly have guessed as the stagecoach lurched its final miles toward a town she had never seen, was that the quiet man waiting for her at the end of this road would ask her a single question. A question no one had ever thought to ask Eleanora Blackwell in 21 years of living. Are you here because you want to be? This is her story. Copper Hollow, the driver called out, his voice stripped raw by 3 weeks of wind and road dust. End of the line for some, beginning for others. The stagecoach shuddered to a halt, and a cloud of red Colorado dust billowed up around the wheels, catching the September afternoon light and turning the air to gold. Through that haze, a town materialized. 12 buildings, maybe 15 if she counted the skeleton of what appeared to be a church rising from raw timber and stubborn faith. Wood and hope. That was all these frontier towns were made of. Wood and hope and desperate people trying to carve something permanent out of wilderness. Eleanora supposed she was one of them now. She tugged at her sleeve. The bruises underneath had faded over 3 weeks from violent purple to a sickly yellow-green, but they were still there. 5 distinct marks, spaced exactly like the fingers of a man's hand. Her uncle's hand. She had mapped the pattern so many times she could trace it in her sleep. The other passengers stirred around her. A merchant bound for Sacramento who smelled of tobacco and ambition, a young couple whispering about land grants and futures, an older woman in a gray bonnet who had watched Eleanora with quiet, knowing eyes for the entire journey, but had never once asked a question. Eleanora had been grateful for that small mercy. She had endured enough questions in her life, and none of them had ever been kind. "You ready for this, dear?" the older woman asked now, pitched low enough for only Eleanora to hear. "I do not have a choice." The woman's weathered hand covered hers, warm and papery and surprisingly strong. "We always have a choice," she said. "Sometimes we just do not care for any of the options." Before Eleanora could respond, the stagecoach door swung open. The driver's face appeared in the frame, creased by 30 years of squinting at horizons that never got any closer. "Miss Blackwell, your intended is waiting." Her intended. Such a clean, formal word for what was really a transaction arranged through ink and desperation. She had answered an advertisement in a Boston newspaper 6 weeks ago, sitting in the dim corner of her uncle's library while he was out drinking and spending her father's money. The words had been plain, almost stark in their simplicity. Rancher in Copper Hollow, Colorado territory, seeking a wife. Must be of good character and willing to work. No family ties preferred. Respond to J. Calloway, general delivery. No family ties preferred. Those 4 words had spoken to her with more clarity than any love poem ever written. They were permission. Permission to be untethered. Permission to be no one's obligation and no one's possession. Eleanora gathered her carpet bag. Everything she owned in this world fit inside it. 3 dresses washed so thin, You could almost read through the fabric. Undergarments, a nightgown, a book of poetry her mother had pressed into her hands on a birthday that felt like another lifetime, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, their young faces bright with a future that would end in a cholera ward 10 years later. That was the full inventory of Eleanora Blackwell's earthly possessions, 21 years of living, and it all fit in a bag she could carry with one hand. She stepped toward the stagecoach door. Her legs trembled. 3 weeks of sitting, yes, but also something deeper. Fear. The bone-deep, blood memory kind of fear that lived in the body long after the mind had made its decision. She was about to marry a man she had never met, based on letters she had read by candlelight while listening for her uncle's footsteps on the stairs. The driver offered his hand. She took it, grateful for the steadiness, and stepped down into the light. Copper Hollow's main street was wider than she had expected. Hitching posts lined both sides, horses flicking their tails against the last of summer's flies. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 20 people drawn by the stagecoach or by the specific news that Jasper Calloway's mail-order bride was arriving today. Word traveled fast in small towns. Word traveled faster when it involved a confirmed bachelor and a woman from back east. There. The driver pointed with his chin. That will be Calloway. Eleanora's breath caught in her chest like a bird hitting glass. She had imagined him 100 different ways during those 3 weeks of travel. Old and bitter, young and cruel, fat and indifferent, thin and cold. She had prepared herself for every version of disappointment because disappointment was the only currency she had ever been paid in reliably. The reality of Jasper Calloway fit none of her preparations. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, as if he had drawn an invisible boundary between himself and everyone else. Perhaps 6 feet tall, lean in the way of men who worked harder than they ate, dark hair that needed cutting, curling slightly where it touched his collar. He wore work clothes, canvas pants faded at the knees, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with the kind of muscle that came from years of physical labor. A leather vest that had clearly been new once, maybe 5 years ago. Boots scuffed to the color of old earth. And in his hands, a hat that he turned slowly, around and around, in a gesture that Eleanora recognized immediately. He was nervous. It was his face that held her, though. Not handsome in the way that Boston society would have understood the word. But there was something carved into it, a quiet architecture of strength that reminded her of the mountains she had crossed to reach this place. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes set deep beneath a serious brow. Those eyes were studying her now with the same careful intensity she was using to study him. He was not smiling. Neither was she. They were two strangers about to bind their lives together based on letters and loneliness, and neither of them was foolish enough to pretend this was anything other than what it was. Eleanora stepped down from the last stair. Her boot heel caught the edge, and she stumbled forward, arms flailing in a moment of graceless panic. Jasper moved on instinct. His hand came up to steady her, catching her arm just above the elbow. A natural gesture. Nothing invasive, nothing aggressive. But his fingers pressed against the fabric of her sleeve, and the cloth shifted under his touch. And he saw them. The bruises. Eleanora watched his eyes drop to the yellowing marks that circled her upper arm like a grotesque bracelet. Fingerprints. Unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen them before. She watched recognition cross his face, followed by something that moved through his expression like a storm front crossing open prairie. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped near his temple. His eyes darkened with something hot and immediate. Anger. But not at her. Never at her. She flinched anyway. 5 years of conditioning had taught her body to brace for impact whenever a man's expression changed. She could not help it. The flinch was older than thought, deeper than reason. Jasper Calloway dropped his hand immediately. He stepped back, putting a full arm's length of space between them, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rough and pitched for her ears alone. I will not hurt you. 4 words. Plain as fence posts. Ordinary as bread. But Eleanora heard what lived underneath them, the words he did not say. I am not him. Whoever left those marks on your skin, I am not that man. Miss Eleanora Blackwell, he said louder now for the benefit of the watching crowd. Yes, her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. Jasper. He offered a slight nod that was almost a smile, but did not quite arrive. Just Jasper. Welcome to Copper Hollow. The crowd pressed forward. Mostly men, she noted, with a handful of women scattered among them like wildflowers in a field of wheat. A tall man wearing a sheriff's badge stepped up with a grin wide enough to hang laundry on. Well, Jasper, she is prettier than you deserve. Hope you remember how to talk to a lady, you old hermit. Scattered laughter rippled through the onlookers. Heat rose in Eleanora's cheeks, but Jasper's expression barely shifted. Thank you for the observation, Sheriff Pratt. I will take it under advisement. More laughter, warmer this time. Eleanora noticed something she had not expected. They were laughing with him, not at him. These people liked Jasper Calloway. That told her more than any letter could. A woman pushed through the crowd with the energy of someone accustomed to parting seas. She was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes that miss at nothing, and a practical wool dress the color of strong tea. For heaven's sake, let the poor woman breathe. She has been traveling for weeks, and you are all standing here gawking like she is a sideshow attraction. The woman turned to Eleanora with a smile that felt like stepping in from the cold. I am Dorothea Weaver. People call me Thea. I run the general store with my husband Silas. You need anything at all, you come see me. Understood? Eleanora found herself smiling despite everything. Thank you, Mrs. Weaver. Thea. We do not stand on formality much out here. She shot a pointed look at the lingering crowd. Though apparently we do not stand much on good manners either. Shoo, all of you. Let Jasper take his bride home. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, trailing curious glances and murmured speculation. Eleanora heard whispers but caught no malice in them. When the street had mostly cleared, Jasper turned to her. I have a wagon just over there. It is about 40 minutes to the ranch. If you would rather rest in town first, I can arrange a room at the boarding house. No. The word came out too quickly, too sharply, carrying the edge of something she did not mean to show. She softened her voice. I mean, I would prefer to see the ranch, if that is all right. Something shifted in his expression, a loosening she could not quite name. Of course. Let me take your trunk. I do not have a trunk, just this. She held up the carpet bag. Jasper looked at it. Then he looked at her. A woman who had crossed a continent with nothing but a single bag. A woman with bruises on her arms and shadows under her eyes. A woman who had answered an advertisement because every other door in her life had been locked from the outside. All right, he said. "The wagon is this way." He did not offer his arm, did not try to take her bag, just walked beside her, matching his longer stride to hers, keeping a comfortable distance that felt like the most deliberate act of kindness anyone had shown her in years. The wagon was simple but well maintained, pulled by 2 bay horses whose coats gleamed with good care. Jasper helped her up to the bench seat with hands that were careful and did not linger, then climbed up beside her and clicked his tongue to the horses. They rolled out of Copper Hollow as the afternoon sun began its long descent toward the mountains, and the town fell away behind them like a door closing softly on an old room. The prairie summoned around them. Grass the color of wild honey rippled in waves under a wind that smelled of sage and distance and the first faint edge of autumn. To the west, mountains rose against the sky like the spine of the earth itself, their highest peaks still holding snow that caught the light and burned white against the blue. It was beautiful. It was enormous. It was nothing at all like Boston. "It is about 5 miles to the ranch," Jasper said after they had been riding in silence for several minutes. "The house is not fancy, but it is solid. Built it myself 4 years ago when I filed the claim. There is a barn, a chicken coop, a well with good water. The land runs cattle. I have about 50 head now, hoping to grow that number." He was giving her facts. Eleanora recognized the strategy because she had used it herself. Safe, practical information that did not require vulnerability from either party. A bridge built of logistics rather than emotion. "That sounds good," she managed. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, exactly, but it was full. Full of questions neither of them was ready to ask. Full of histories neither of them was ready to tell. Full of the enormous, terrifying reality of what they were doing. "I should tell you something," Jasper said. "About the arrangement." He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "The wedding is set for 3 days from now. Reverend Tucker makes a circuit through this area once a month, and I arranged for him to stop here. But I want you to understand something, and I need you to hear me clearly." Eleanora braced herself. Here it comes, she thought. The conditions, the demands, the list of expectations that would reveal exactly what kind of cage she had walked into this time. 3 days, Jasper said. That is how long you have to decide if you want to go through with this. You can stay in the house, learn the ranch, get a sense of the life. And if at the end of those 3 days you decide this is not what you want, I will give you money for passage to anywhere you choose. Boston, San Francisco, anywhere. The words did not make sense. Eleanora turned to stare at him. You would do that? After I came all this way? I want a wife, he said, but I want a willing one. A partner, not a prisoner. He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes was almost unbearable. So yes, I would do that. They rode without speaking for a long stretch after that. Eleanora watched the landscape pass and tried to make room in her understanding for what he had just offered her. A choice. He was giving her a choice. The word felt strange in her mind, like a language she had once spoken but had forgotten. The bruises, she said suddenly, surprising herself. On my arm. Jasper's hands tightened on the reins. You do not have to tell me. My uncle, Edmund Blackwell. He was my guardian after my parents died when I was 16. He controlled my inheritance, kept me locked in his house, hit me when he drank, which was often. When I turned 21, the money became legally mine, but he would not let go. He was going to force me to marry his business partner's son. A man worse than him, if that is possible. You ran, Jasper said quietly. It was not a question. I ran. I took what little I could carry and left in the middle of the night. He will be looking for me. He will not give up the money easily. Jasper was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she was not expecting. When you marry me, that money becomes legally mine under current law. You know that. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. I want you to understand. If you decide to marry me, I will use that money however you want. Invest it. Save it for children someday. Give it away. It is yours, no matter what the law says. I do not need it. The ranch supports itself. I will put that in writing if you need me to. Eleanora felt tears building behind her eyes like water against a dam. Why? Why would you give me a choice? Why would you offer to let me go? Why would you be decent? Jasper pulled the wagon to a stop. They were alone on the prairie, nothing but grass and sky and the enormous silence of open country. He turned to face her fully. My father was not a good man. He drank. He had a temper. My mother took the worst of it for years before she finally got out. Took me and my sister to her parents in Ohio. I watched what that kind of life did to her. The fear, the flinching, the way she never felt safe, not even after we were free. He looked out toward the mountains. I swore I would never be that kind of man. I would never make a woman feel trapped or afraid in her own home. So when I decided I wanted a wife, I wanted someone who chose me with full knowledge of what she was getting into, not someone with no other options. And what is she getting? Eleanora asked. An honest man, a hard worker, someone who will provide for you and protect you and respect your choices. I will make mistakes. I am sure of that. But I can promise I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I will never force you to do anything you do not want to do. And I will give you all the time you need to feel safe. Eleanora studied his face the way she had learned to study faces in her uncle's house, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden door that led to cruelty. She had become an expert at finding those doors. She did not find one in Jasper Calloway's face. What she saw instead was a tired man who had chosen years of loneliness over the risk of becoming his father. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he confirmed. And whatever you decide, I will respect it. He clicked to the horses and they moved forward again. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the mountain peaks, rising gradually from the prairie like something that had grown there rather than been built. A house, silver gray with weather, small but solid. A porch with a rocking chair positioned to face the sunset. A red barn, paint fading, standing larger than the house. Cattle grazing in a pasture beyond, black and white shapes moving slowly against green grass. A creek cutting through the valley floor, lined with cottonwood trees whose leaves had just begun to turn gold. Home, Jasper said. Just the one word. As if that explained everything. Inside, the house was dim and cool. A front room with a stone fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the window. Clean but sparse. A kitchen with a cast iron stove, a pump sink, open shelves. And down a short hallway, 2 doors. This one is yours, Jasper said, opening the first. Eleanora stepped into a room that smelled of lavender and clean linen. A bed with a simple wooden frame, a dresser, a washstand, a window with curtains that someone had sewn with care. Not fancy, but private and whole. "The other room is mine," Jasper said from the doorway, "and there is a lock on your door. Key is in the top dresser drawer. Use it whenever you want." He shifted his weight, color rising in his face. "I know we will be married, but what I said about choices, that includes everything. I will not pressure you. We go as slow as you need." Something cracked inside Eleanora's chest, not breaking, shifting, making space for something she had believed was dead and buried years ago. Hope. "Thank you," she whispered. Jasper nodded once. "I will be in the barn if you need anything. I usually make supper around 6. You are welcome to join me, or I can bring something to your room. I will think about it. That is fine." He started to leave, then turned back. "Eleanora, I am glad you are here. Whatever you decide after 3 days, I am glad you came." Then he was gone. His footsteps quiet on the wood floor, the front door closing gently behind him. Eleanora stood in the center of her room, with a lock and a key, and a man on the other side of the wall who had asked her what she wanted and then waited for an answer. She found the key in the dresser drawer exactly where he said it would be. Heavy brass, solid in her palm. She turned it in the lock and heard the bolt slide home. Locked in, yes, but also locked out, keeping the world at bay while she found her footing in a life she had not dared to imagine. She unpacked her carpet bag. It took less than 2 minutes. She placed the daguerreotype of her parents on the dresser, their young faces smiling up at her from across the divide of death and years. "I think I might be safe here," she told them. "I think I might have found someone good." The sun set. She heard Jasper return to the house, heard him moving carefully in the kitchen, the clank of a pot, the squeak of the pump handle. The smell of something simple and warm drifted under her door. Eleanora washed her face, tidied her hair, looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, pale, thin, shadows under her eyes deep enough to lose coins in. She looked exhausted. She looked frightened. But she did not look broken. Not anymore. She unlocked the door and went to find Jasper Calloway. And in the room down the hall, before she emerged, Jasper had been lying on his bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about bruises shaped like fingerprints, thinking about a woman who flinched from kindness because cruelty was the only language anyone had ever spoken to her, thinking about the 3 days ahead and the promises he had made. He would keep them, every single one, no matter what it cost him. Because somewhere between reading her first letter and watching her step off that stagecoach, Jasper Calloway had begun to believe that Eleanora Blackwell might be the person worth waiting an entire lifetime for. He just was not ready to admit that yet, not even to himself. But out beyond the ranch, beyond the mountains, beyond the miles of wire and rail that connected this small valley to the rest of the world, Edmund Blackwell sat in a private rail car heading west. In his coat pocket was a letter from a detective agency confirming that a young woman matching his niece's description had purchased a stagecoach ticket to a town called Copper Hollow, Colorado Territory. Edmund folded the letter carefully and placed it back in his pocket. Then he poured himself a whiskey and watched the landscape blur past the window. She thought she could run. She had always been a foolish girl. They ate supper together that first evening at the small kitchen table while the last light bled out of the sky beyond the window. Jasper had made stew, Beef and potatoes and carrots, seasoned with herbs Eleanora could not quite identify, simple food prepared by hands more accustomed to mending fences than measuring salt. He had warned her it was nothing special. He was wrong. It was warm and honest and filling. And after 3 weeks of stagecoach jerky and stale bread, it tasted like mercy. "This is good," she said, and meant it. Jasper looked up from his bowl with an expression of mild surprise, as if he had been bracing for criticism and received something else entirely. "Thank you. I will not pretend to be much of a cook. I can keep a person alive, but I would not call it art." "Survival is underrated," Eleanora said quietly. Something passed between them across the table. Not a smile exactly, but an understanding. Two people who knew exactly what survival cost and what it was worth. They cleaned up together despite his protests that she did not need to help. Eleanora washed while Jasper dried, and they moved around the small kitchen with a surprising ease, handing things back and forth without collision or confusion, as if their bodies had already begun to learn a language their minds were still translating. When everything was put away, an awkward silence settled over the house like the first frost of autumn. Evening stretched ahead of them, vast and uncharted. "I usually read for a while before bed," Jasper offered. "You are welcome to sit by the fire. Or, if you would rather have privacy, I understand. I would like to sit by the fire, if that is all right." "Of course." He built up the flames while Eleanora settled into the rocking chair. She had brought her poetry book but did not open it. Instead, she watched the fire and listened to the house breathe around her, the creak of settling wood, the whisper of wind finding gaps in the walls, the occasional distant sound of cattle moving in the dark pasture. Jasper sat in the other chair with a thick volume about cattle ranching that looked like it had been read cover to cover more than once. They read in silence, and the only sounds were the crack of burning pine and the soft turn of pages. It was the most peaceful hour Eleanora had experienced in 5 years. No tension coiling in the air, no footsteps to dread, no bottle clinking against glass in another room. Just two people sharing space without demands. After perhaps an hour, Jasper closed his book. "I usually turn in around 9. Early mornings on a ranch." Eleanora nodded. "I should sleep too." They stood, and for a moment they faced each other in the firelight. Two strangers bound by paper and postage, and the stubborn human refusal to accept loneliness as a permanent condition. "Good night, Eleanora. Good night, Jasper." She went to her room, closed the door, turned the lock, changed into her nightgown, and slid under quilts that smelled of lavender and sunshine and someone's careful attention. She waited for the old terrors to arrive. The racing heart, the inventory of exits, the listening for sounds that meant danger was coming closer. Instead, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed: safety. For the first time in 5 years, Eleanora Blackwell fell asleep without fear. Morning arrived softly. Birdsong and golden light through the curtains and the faraway sound of a rooster announcing his importance to the world. Eleanora lay still for a moment, disoriented, until memory reassembled itself around her. The ranch. Jasper. The 3 days. She rose and dressed quickly in her plainest dress, twisted her hair into a loose knot, and unlocked the door. The house smelled of coffee and something baking. She followed the scent to the kitchen and found Jasper at the stove with his back to her. He had already been outside. His boots carried fresh dust, and there was dampness on his shirt collar from washing at the pump. "Good morning," she said. He turned, and surprise moved across his face like light across water. "Morning. I did not expect you up this early. It is barely past dawn. I am used to early mornings." That was true, though she did not explain why. In her uncle's house, early mornings had been the only safe hours, the only time she could move through the rooms without encountering Edmund, who rarely surfaced before noon, his eyes red and his temper already gathering like a weather system. Jasper gestured toward the stove. "Biscuits. They are edible, I promise. Coffee is in the pot. Help yourself." Eleanora poured coffee, added sugar, and took the first sip standing at the counter, strong and hot, and exactly what her body needed. She wrapped both hands around the cup and let the warmth soak into her palms. "Did you sleep?" Jasper asked without looking up from the oven. "Better than I have in months." The admission surprised her. But it was true, and she was tired of lying, tired of pretending everything was fine when nothing had been fine for years. Jasper pulled a pan of golden biscuits from the oven, and the smell filled the kitchen like a benediction. "I have work to do this morning. Cattle to check, fences to mend. But I was thinking, if you wanted, I could show you around the ranch first. Let you get your bearings. I would like that." They ate breakfast at the small table. Biscuits with butter and honey, eggs he had collected from the coop before she woke. Simple food, but prepared with a care that Eleanora found unexpectedly moving. This man had risen before dawn, fed the chickens, gathered eggs, washed at the pump, made biscuits from scratch, and brewed coffee, all before she had opened her eyes. Not because she had asked, not because someone demanded it of him, because he wanted her first morning in his home to begin with warmth. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "How did you choose this land?" Something in Jasper's face shifted, the way a locked room looks when someone finally opens a window. "I came out here 4 years ago with enough saved to file a claim. Spent 2 months riding around looking at different parcels. Most men wanted land closer to town, easier access to markets. But when I found this valley," he paused, searching. "The creek runs year-round. The grazing is good. There is shelter from the wind and timber for building. It felt right, like something I could grow into. You built the house yourself? With help from neighbors. That is how it works out here. You help someone raise their barn. They help you raise your house. Sheriff Pratt and Harlan Kincaid both put in weeks of work, and I have done the same for others since." Eleanora tried to imagine it. Men working together under open sky, lifting beams and hammering nails, building community one roofline at a time. It was so different from Boston, where neighbors competed behind curtain lace and kept ledgers of social debt. After breakfast, Jasper led her outside. The morning air was cool and crystalline, the sky so purely blue it made her eyes ache. He showed her the chicken coop first. A dozen hens and one magnificent rooster with iridescent feathers and an attitude of supreme authority. "They are yours to manage if you want," Jasper said, leaning against the fence. "Egg money is traditionally the wife's income out here. You can sell extras in town. Keep the profit for yourself." Eleanora reached into a nesting box and felt the smooth warmth of a fresh egg against her palm. Such a small thing. But it represented something vast. Autonomy. Income of her own. Money that no one else controlled. They moved to the barn. The air inside smelled of hay and horse and well-oiled leather. 2 bay horses in their stalls, plus a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze and gentle eyes. "This is Clover," Jasper said, stroking the mare's nose with the easy affection of a man who understood that gentleness was not weakness. She is calm, patient, forgiving of mistakes. If you want to learn to ride, she would be the one. I have never been on a horse. We can fix that." Jasper's voice was careful, deliberate. Being able to ride means freedom out here. It means you are not dependent on anyone to take you places. Not even me. There it was. Again. That word. Freedom. He kept offering it to her like a man who understood exactly how precious it was to someone who had been caged. Not because she had told him everything, because he recognized the shape of captivity even when it wore respectable clothes. They walked through the pastures. Jasper pointed out cattle, explained bloodlines and breeding plans, showed her how to read the land for signs of water and weather. He showed her the creek, running cold and clear over smooth stones, lined with cottonwood trees whose leaves flickered silver and green in the breeze. Then the garden, or what had been a garden once, neat rows still visible under a chaos of weeds and neglect. Jasper rubbed the back of his neck with obvious embarrassment. "I started it with good intentions. Turns out cattle are more forgiving than vegetables." Eleanora knelt and pushed her fingers into the soil. It was good earth, dark, rich, hungry for attention. "I can do this," she said, and something in her voice surprised even herself. The certainty of it. "I helped in my mother's garden when I was young, before she got sick. I remember how." "You do not have to. I want to." She stood and met his eyes directly. "I need to be useful, Jasper. I need to contribute. I spent 5 years being told I was fragile and incompetent and could not be trusted to manage my own life. I need to prove that wrong. Not to you, to myself." Something moved behind his expression that she could not quite read. "You are useful just by being here," he said. "But if gardening brings you joy, then please, take it over. I would be grateful." They were walking back toward the house when Eleanora asked the question that had been building in her chest since the stagecoach. "Why did you really want a wife?" The honest answer. Not the practical one. Jasper was quiet for several steps. The kind of quiet that meant he was actually thinking about his response, rather than reaching for something convenient. "I was lonely." He said it without shame, without deflection. "I built a good life here. The ranch does well. I have friends in town, good neighbors. But at the end of every day, I came back to an empty house and ate supper alone and wondered what the point was. Building something just for myself started to feel hollow, incomplete. You could have courted someone local. There are not many unmarried women in Copper Hollow, and the ones who are, they have their choice of younger men, men with charm, men who know how to make conversation at a dance. I am 32 years old. I work too much and talk too little. I am not the kind of man women choose when they have options." Eleanora stopped walking. "I do not believe that. It is not self-pity. Just arithmetic." Jasper looked out at his land, at the valley he had carved from wilderness through sheer stubbornness. "But through letters, I could be honest about what I had to offer. A home, security, respect, and maybe, somewhere out there, there was a woman who valued those things more than charm." "There was," Eleanora said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that had no name yet, but had weight. A recognition, a beginning, fragile as new ice on a pond, and just as transparent. The sound of an approaching wagon broke the moment. Jasper glanced toward the road. "That will be Thea Weaver. I should have warned you." News travels at the speed of gossip out here. Panic fluttered in Eleanora's chest like a trapped moth. She was not ready for visitors, not ready for questions and scrutiny and the careful measurement that came with being the new stranger in a small town. Jasper must have seen it in her face. "You do not have to see her. I can tell her you are resting." Eleanora took a breath, drew it down deep into her lungs where the fear lived. "No, it is fine. I should meet people." Dorothea Weaver descended from her wagon with the energy of a woman who had never in her life waited to be helped down from anything. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and her sharp eyes took in Eleanora with a single sweeping glance that probably cataloged everything from the shadows under her eyes to the 2 large shoes on her feet. "Jasper Calloway, did you honestly think I would let a new bride arrive without a proper welcome?" She did not wait for an answer. She turned to Eleanora with a warmth that felt like standing near a stove on a cold morning. "I brought soup, bread, strawberry preserves from last summer, and coffee beans because this man goes through them like they are water and probably does not have enough to share properly." "That is very kind," Eleanora managed. "Not kindness, just sense. A household needs food, and you have both been too busy being polite to think about provisions. Now come inside, both of you. Sit down and let me put this away." Before Eleanora could form a response, Thea had swept past them into the house with the confident authority of a woman who had been organizing other people's lives for decades and saw no reason to stop now. Jasper gave Eleanora a look that mixed apology with something that might have been amusement. "She means well. She is just a force of nature." They sat at the kitchen table while Thea unpacked her basket and talked in a steady stream that somehow managed to be both overwhelming and oddly comforting. "The bread is sourdough, started the culture myself 5 years ago. The soup is chicken and dumplings, just heat it for lunch. The preserves are strawberry, best batch I have ever made, if I say so myself." Eleanora answered Thea's questions with growing ease. Yes, the stagecoach was uncomfortable. Yes, she was from Boston. Yes, the landscape was startlingly different from anything she had experienced before. Thea listened with the kind of genuine interest that made Eleanora's throat tighten, because it had been so long since anyone had asked her anything and actually wanted to hear the answer. "I am sure you are wondering why I answered Jasper's advertisement," Eleanora said, deciding to walk toward the unspoken question rather than wait for it to find her. Thea's expression softened into something that looked remarkably like recognition. "Honey, everyone out here is running from something or running toward something, sometimes both at the same time. I came out from Philadelphia 15 years ago because my family did not approve of Silas, said he was beneath me. We built everything we have from nothing, and I have never once looked back. I do not judge." Something tight in Eleanora's chest loosened by a single degree. "But I will tell you this," Thea continued, and her voice dropped into a register that meant she was no longer making conversation, but delivering truth. "Jasper Calloway is one of the good ones. When our store burned down 3 years ago, he showed up the next morning with lumber and tools and worked for 2 weeks straight rebuilding it. Would not take a cent. He sits with sick neighbors through the night. He brings food to families struggling through hard winters. He does not announce these things or expect gratitude. He just shows up when it matters." Eleanora glanced at Jasper, who had developed a sudden intense interest in the wood grain of the table. "What Thea is too polite to mention," he said quietly, "is that she and Silas saved my life my first winter. Found me half frozen after a blizzard caught me checking the herd. Brought me in, nursed me back." Because that is what neighbors do, Thea said firmly. And that is what I am here to tell you, Eleanora. You are not alone out here. You need anything, you come to us. The other women, too. Rosemary Pratt, Opal Kincaid, young Polly Sutter, out on her homestead. We look out for each other. It was a promise and a gentle warning delivered in the same breath. These people protected their own. They would welcome Eleanora, but they would also be watching. Thank you, Eleanora said. I appreciate that more than you know. After Thea left, the house felt quieter but somehow less empty, as if the woman's visit had filled it with something invisible that lingered. Jasper and Eleanora stood on the porch watching the wagon shrink down the road. She is a force of nature, Eleanora said. Jasper laughed. A real laugh, short but genuine, and it transformed his face so completely that Eleanora felt her breath catch. The seriousness fell away for just a moment, and underneath it was someone younger, someone who might have laughed more often if life had not taught him to be careful with joy. That is one way to describe her, but she is right about the community. People help each other out here. It is the only way any of us survive. They spent the rest of the morning working. Jasper mending fence, while Eleanora attacked the garden with borrowed gloves and a determination that surprised them both. She pulled weeds until her back ached and her fingers were stained with earth, and the physical labor felt like medicine, purposeful and grounding and entirely her own. Over lunch, warmed soup from Thea's basket, Eleanora told him the rest of what she had not said on the wagon ride, the details Edmund had buried beneath his respectable surface, the way he had tried once to force her into a marriage with a business associate's son, a man whose eyes had lingered on her in ways that made her skin crawl. The time she had attempted to leave at 19, and Edmund had caught her at the train station, gripping her arm in front of a crowd while smiling as though he were helping a confused child. The doctors he kept on retainer who would sign any document he placed before them. Jasper listened without interrupting. His jaw was tight, and his hands had curled around his coffee cup with a grip that turned his knuckles white, but he did not speak until she was finished. When he did, his voice was rough. "You are safe now. I give you my word on that." That evening, they discovered Jasper's small collection of books, 3 volumes on a shelf near the fireplace, Shakespeare's collected plays, Emerson's essays, and a worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass with pencil notes in the margins. "You read Whitman?" Eleanora could not hide her surprise. Jasper looked embarrassed. "I only had schooling through 8th grade, but I like to read when I can. Whitman, I do not always understand all of it, but something about it speaks to me." Eleanora opened the book and saw his marginalia, neat, careful handwriting, questions in the margins, underlined passages. This was not a man who consumed words passively. He wrestled with them. "I am large," she read aloud. "I contain multitudes. Do you believe that? That we can hold contradictions inside ourselves and still be whole?" Jasper was quiet for a long moment. "I think it has to be true," he said. "Otherwise, how could someone like me, someone who wants to be gentle but was raised watching violence, ever be anything other than broken?" The vulnerability in his voice made Eleanora's throat tight. "You are not broken. Neither are you." They held each other's gaze across the small room while the fire crackled and the night pressed against the windows, and something shifted between them. Not a wall coming down exactly. More like a crack appearing in mortar that had been solid for years. Light getting through where before there had been only stone. The second day passed in a rhythm that was beginning to feel almost natural. Morning chores. A visit from Sheriff Cordell Pratt, who came by ostensibly to discuss reports of cattle rustlers in the area, but whose real purpose was clearly to assess Eleanora with friendly, watchful eyes. "My wife Rosemary wants to meet you," Pratt said over coffee. "She is carrying our third and supposed to be resting, but she is fit to burst with curiosity. The women have a sewing circle that meets at our place. Rosemary, Thea, Opal Kincaid, sometimes young Polly Sutter if she can get away from the homestead. They would love to have you join." The thought of a room full of women, all of them curious about the stranger who had come to marry Jasper Calloway, made Eleanora's stomach clench. But she heard herself say yes before the fear could close her throat. I should meet people, start building connections. After Pratt left, Jasper turned to her. "You do not have to go if you are not ready." "I know, but I cannot hide forever." She paused. "Besides, when I start living here, I need to be part of the community." Jasper noticed her choice of word. When, not if. Something loosened in his shoulders that she had not noticed was tight. Eleanora thought about that as she prepared for bed. Surviving versus living. She had been surviving for 5 years, counting exits instead of blessings, reading danger instead of books, bracing instead of breathing. Maybe it was time to try something else. The third morning came wrapped in clouds and the smell of rain. Jasper frowned at the sky over breakfast. "Storm coming in fast. I need to move the herd to lower pasture before it hits. Should not take long, but the weather out here can turn mean without much warning." "Can I help?" He looked at her across the table, and she watched him weigh caution against something else. "You do not know how to ride. Then teach me. You said Clover was gentle and forgiving. I am a fast learner." Jasper studied her face for a long moment, reading something there that seemed to satisfy him. "All right, but we move quickly. That sky is not patient." He saddled Clover with efficient hands while explaining the essentials. How to mount, how to hold the reins, how to guide with pressure from the knees, how to trust the horse. "Clover knows this land better than I do," he said. "Give her her head and she will take care of you." Mounting was graceless. Eleanora's skirt caught, her balance wobbled, and she grabbed the saddle horn with both hands like a woman clutching a life raft. But she was up, and Clover stood patient as a schoolteacher beneath her, waiting. "Good," Jasper said from atop his own horse. "Just follow me. Let her do the work." They rode toward the upper pasture, and Eleanora felt every muscle in her body screaming with unfamiliarity. But gradually, almost against her will, she began to feel the rhythm of the horse beneath her. The steady rocking, the powerful warmth of the animal, the way Clover responded to the smallest shift in weight. It was nothing like the rigid control of a carriage ride. It was a conversation conducted entirely through the body. The cattle were restless, sensing the weather. Jasper moved among them with the calm authority of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Then a young steer broke from the group, heading uphill instead of down toward safety. "Eleanora," Jasper called through the rising wind. "Can you turn him? Just ride in front. Let Clover block his path." Her heart hammered. Every cautious instinct told her to stay back, stay safe, do not risk the unfamiliar. But something else rose up in her, something that had been buried under 5 years of obedience and fear. She nudged Clover forward. The mare responded instantly, moving to intercept. The steer stopped, considered his options, then turned back toward the herd. "Perfect!" Jasper shouted, and even through the wind, she could hear something in his voice that sounded like admiration. "You are a natural." Pride bloomed in Eleanora's chest like a fire catching in dry kindling. She had done something useful, something competent, something that required courage and instinct, and the willingness to act when acting was terrifying. And she had not failed. They got the cattle to lower ground as the first heavy drops began to fall. By the time they reached the barn, the sky had opened completely, and they were both soaked through and breathless and laughing. Laughing. The sound of it coming from Eleanora's own throat startled her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed without calculation, without checking first whether it was safe to make noise. "That was incredible," she said, water streaming down her face. "I have never done anything like that in my life." Jasper grinned. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead and rain dripped from his jaw, and the grin made him look like someone she wanted to know for a very long time. "You did great, really." They stood in the barn with rain hammering the roof above them and horses steaming in their stalls, and the whole world reduced to this small, dry space they shared. And Eleanora felt something she had not felt in years. Alive. Not just safe, not just surviving. Alive. Present in her own body. Connected to the physical world of rain and horse and earth. Capable. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me help. For teaching me. For all of it." Jasper's expression grew serious, and the lightness of the moment gave way to something heavier and more important. "Eleanora, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her breath caught. "All right. Tomorrow is the third day. Reverend Tucker will be here by afternoon. He will perform the ceremony if you want him to. But I need to know, do you want to marry me? Not because you are afraid to go back. Not because you feel obligated by the distance you traveled. Not because you have no other options. But because you actually want this life. This ranch. This town." He paused. "Me." Eleanora looked at this man who had given her a locked door and the key to it, who had taught her to ride not to impress her but to free her, who asked her what she wanted and then stood back and waited for the answer without trying to shape it. "I am still scared," she said quietly. "I know. I do not know if I can be everything a wife is supposed to be. Not yet. I know that too. But I want to try. I want to stay. I want to build something here with you." Jasper's face changed. The careful guard he wore like armor shifted, and underneath it she saw something raw and unprotected. Hope. His own version of the same terrifying, magnificent thing she was feeling. Yeah. He stepped toward her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. When she did not move, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm and steady, and her fingers fit against his like a key settling into a lock it was always meant to open. "Then I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice," he said. Rain roared against the barn roof. Thunder rolled across the prairie like the voice of something ancient and indifferent. Two people stood hand in hand in the smell of hay and horse and honest labor, choosing each other despite fear, despite wounds, despite every lesson life had taught them about the cost of trust. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something new was putting down roots. But 500 miles to the east, on a train that had already crossed the Missouri and was pushing relentlessly toward the Colorado border, Edmund Blackwell unfolded a telegram from his detective and read the latest update. Confirmed. Subject arrived Copper Hollow, Colorado Territory, has taken residence at Ranch of 1J. Calloway, approximately 5 miles outside town. Marriage reportedly planned, awaiting further instructions. Edmund read the message twice. Then he struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper and watched it curl and blacken and fall to ash on the floor of his private car. Marriage. The foolish girl thought a piece of paper and a frontier nobody could protect her from him. She had no idea what was coming. The rain stopped before dawn, and the wedding day arrived wrapped in washed light and the smell of clean earth. Eleanora woke to birdsong and the golden pour of September sun through her curtains, and for a moment she simply lay still, letting the reality of it settle over her like a quilt. Today she would marry Jasper Calloway. She dressed in her best dress, the blue cotton that her mother had once said made her eyes look like the sea before a storm. Her hands trembled as she pinned up her hair, and she had to start over twice before the pins would hold. Not from fear, from something closer to vertigo, the dizzying sensation of standing at the edge of a new life and choosing to step forward. When she emerged from her room, Jasper was setting breakfast on the table. He had shaved. His jaw was smooth and slightly raw from the razor, and he wore clean dark trousers, a white shirt pressed with obvious effort, and a vest she had never seen before. It looked new. He had bought it for today, she realized, and the thought of him riding into town to purchase a vest for his wedding made something turn over softly in her chest. "Morning," he said. His voice had a slight roughness to it that she had not heard before. "Morning." They sat. Neither of them ate much. The biscuits went cold. The coffee grew lukewarm. The air between them hummed with a charge that was not unpleasant but was impossible to ignore. "Are you all right?" Jasper asked finally. "I think so, are you?" Terrified. He offered a small, almost sheepish smile. "I have faced down charging cattle and blizzards that could freeze a man standing, but the idea of saying vows in front of witnesses has me more rattled than any of it." Eleanora felt some of her own tension release. "I am glad I am not the only one." They cleaned up breakfast together, moving around each other with the ease that 3 days of proximity had already begun to build. Hands reaching for the same dishcloth, shoulders nearly touching at the basin. A rhythm forming between their bodies that their hearts were still learning to trust. Dorothea Weaver arrived first, because of course she did. She swept in carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and prairie blooms so vivid they looked like fragments of the landscape itself, goldenrod and purple aster and wild sunflower wrapped in a ribbon of blue calico. "Every bride should have flowers," Thea announced, pressing the bouquet into Eleanora's hands with an authority that permitted no argument. "And do not you dare cry yet. Save it for the vows." Behind her came Silas Weaver, a quiet man who carried a camera and a tripod and nodded his greetings in a way that suggested he had long ago learned the most efficient path through any situation was to let his wife clear the road ahead of him. "Thought you might want a photograph," he said, "to mark the day." More people arrived. Sheriff Cordell Pratt with Rosemary, who was enormously pregnant and radiant with the particular glow of a woman who had chosen to feel joy despite discomfort. Rosemary embraced Eleanora as if they had known each other for years rather than days, and the warmth of it was so unexpected and so genuine that Eleanora had to blink hard against the sting behind her eyes. Harlan and Opal Kincaid came next, both in their 60s, weathered and kind, carrying a handmade quilt between them that Opal had apparently been stitching for weeks in anticipation. "For cold nights," Opal said with a wink that made Eleanora's cheeks burn. Even young Polly Sutter had ridden 8 miles from her homestead, arriving windblown and grinning on a horse that looked almost as young and determined as she was. "I was not about to miss this," Polly declared. "This is the most exciting thing that has happened in Copper Hollow since the weaver's store caught fire." The house filled with voices and laughter and the clatter of people arranging chairs and food in themselves. Eleanora stood in the center of it and felt overwhelmed in a way that had nothing to do with fear. These people had come, not because they were obligated or because they wanted something from her, but because they believed that a marriage was an event that deserved witnesses. That community was not a concept, but an action, that showing up mattered. Reverend Tucker arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. A rail-thin man in his 50s with kind eyes set deep in a face that had seen more frontier hardship than any pulpit should require. He shook Jasper's hand with the vigor of old acquaintance and turned to Eleanora with a warmth that felt practiced in the best sense of the word. "Jasper Calloway," he said in a voice far too large for his narrow frame. "I heard you finally found yourself a bride. Let us make this official before she comes to her senses and realizes she could do better." Laughter moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Jasper shook his head but did not deny it. "Ready?" he asked Eleanora, his voice low enough that the word belonged only to the space between them. She looked at the room, at Thea beaming with maternal ferocity, at Rosemary pressing a handkerchief to her eyes, at Opal Kincaid nodding slowly as if confirming a decision she had already approved, at Jasper, who stood before her with his new vest and his nervous hands, and his eyes full of a hope so carefully contained it made her want to weep. "Ready," she said. They stood before Reverend Tucker in the small front room with everyone crowded close, filling the space with warmth and witness. Afternoon light poured through the window and caught the wild flowers in Eleanora's hands and turned them incandescent. The Reverend opened his worn Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Eleanora listened to the words she had heard recited in churches and parlors throughout her girlhood, words she had once believed she would never hear spoken over her own life, but her attention kept returning to Jasper's face. He was looking at her with an intensity that was almost unbearable. Not possessive, not demanding, just present, fully, completely present. As if she were the only solid thing in a world that had been fog and distance for too long. "Do you, Jasper Calloway, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do." His voice was clear and did not waver. "And do you, Eleanora Blackwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" The room held its breath. Eleanora felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders like a mantle. This was the hinge, the before and after, the line drawn across the center of her life, dividing everything she had survived from everything she might yet become. "I do." Jasper produced 2 simple gold bands that Eleanora had not known he possessed. His hands were steady as he slid the ring onto her finger. Hers trembled only slightly as she placed the matching band on his. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jasper, you may kiss your bride." He looked at her, a question in his eyes. Even now, even at this moment prescribed by tradition and witnessed by a room full of people who expected it. He asked permission. Eleanora gave the smallest nod. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. Brief, gentle, warm. A kiss that promised everything and demanded nothing. A kiss that tasted like the beginning of a sentence neither of them knew the ending to yet. The room erupted. Rosemary was sobbing openly while Sheriff Pratt assured everyone it was just hormones and was immediately overruled by his wife's elbow in his ribs. Thea pulled Eleanora into an embrace so fierce it felt like being claimed by the earth itself. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Calloway," she whispered, and the name landed in Eleanora's chest and took root there like a seed in good soil. The afternoon dissolved into celebration. Fiddle music materialized from somewhere. Furniture was pushed against walls, and couples began to dance on the cleared floor. Food appeared in quantities that defied the modest resources of a frontier community. Roasted chicken, fresh bread still warm from half a dozen different ovens, pies and cakes that the women had been baking since word of the wedding spread. Jasper led Eleanora through her first dance, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through steps she did not know with a patience that never once made her feel clumsy. "Are you happy?" he asked as they swayed to the music. Eleanora considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think I am. Or I am beginning to learn what happy might feel like again." "That is enough," Jasper said. "That is more than enough." The guests departed slowly as the sun began its descent. Rosemary was the last to leave, gripping Eleanora's fingers with both hands. "If you need anything," she said, "anything at all, you send word. Women out here, we look after each other." When the house was finally empty and quiet, Jasper and Eleanora stood on the porch and watched the last wagon disappear down the road. The wreckage of celebration lay behind them. Dishes on every surface, chairs scattered, crumbs on the floor. Evidence of joy. "We should clean up," Eleanora said without enthusiasm. "It can wait until morning." Jasper turned to face her, and the fading light caught the gold of his new wedding band. "Eleanora, I want you to know that nothing has to change tonight. You can lock your door the same as you have every night. I meant what I said about going slow." She looked at this man who was now her husband, who had just stood before a room full of his neighbors and pledged his life to hers, and was now offering to sleep alone on their wedding night because her comfort mattered more to him than tradition or expectation or his own desire. "What if I do not want to lock it?" she said. His eyes widened by a fraction. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I would like to try. Not everything. But maybe we could just talk. In your room instead of by the fire. Would that be all right?" "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted. "But I want to try anyway." They cleaned the worst of the mess in companionable silence. Then Jasper led the way down the hall. His room was simple, like everything about him. A larger bed than hers, a dresser, a washstand, a window facing the mountains. "I will give you privacy to change," he said, and stepped out. Eleanora changed into her nightgown with a heart that beat so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. When she called him back, he came in wearing cotton sleep clothes, simple and modest, and sat on the far side of the bed with the careful posture of a man trying very hard to take up as little space as possible. "This is strange," she said. "Very strange," he agreed. Then he laughed, and she laughed, and the impossible tension that had been building between them since the moment she had said, "I do," simply cracked and fell away like ice breaking from a riverbank in spring. "Tell me something I do not know about you," she said, pulling her knees to her chest. "Something small. I am afraid of snakes, completely, irrationally terrified." Which is absurd for a rancher, but there it is. I cannot whistle. Everyone in my family could. I never learned how. I will teach you. I will protect you from snakes. They traded small confessions back and forth across the white landscape of the bed. Favorite foods, childhood mishaps, embarrassments they had never told anyone. Jasper described falling off his horse trying to impress a girl when he was 15. Eleanora confessed to setting her mother's parlor curtains on fire while reading by candlelight too close to the window. Hours passed. The candle burned low. Eleanora found herself lying down, her head on the pillow, Jasper beside her, close but not touching. The space between them felt charged and sacred and entirely their own. "Can I hold your hand?" he asked. She nodded. His fingers found hers and laced through them. Warm, calloused, gentle. "This is nice," she whispered. "Yeah, it really is." Eleanora fell asleep like that, hand in hand with her husband, feeling safer than she had felt since the night her mother tucked her in for the last time and told her everything was going to be fine. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Eleanora would look back on later as the happiest of her life up to that point. She threw herself into the work of the ranch with a hunger that surprised them both. The garden flourished under her attention. Tomatoes, squash, beans, carrots. She learned to gather eggs without being pecked, to churn butter, to bake bread that rose properly. She rode Clover every day until the mare felt less like a foreign language and more like a second heartbeat. Jasper taught her to read cattle for signs of illness, to mend wire fencing, to predict weather by the behavior of the horses. At night they shared his bed, talking in the darkness until one or the other drifted off. He never pressured her for more, never made her feel that talking and hand-holding and the occasional brush of lips against her forehead were insufficient. Small intimacies accumulated like snowfall, his hand finding the small of her back as she passed him in the kitchen, her fingers straightening his collar before he left for the barn. The first time she called him Jasper instead of Mr. Calloway without thinking about it, and the way his whole face changed when she did. Comfortable silences that needed no words to fill them. The quiet joy of being known by someone who did not require you to perform. She joined the sewing circle at Rosemary Pratt's house. The women received her without reservation, teaching her to quilt, sharing recipes and remedies and gossip that was more affectionate than cruel. Thea brought books. Opal Kincaid brought wisdom delivered in small, precise doses. Polly Sutter brought the raw energy of youth and the kind of questions that made everyone laugh. These women became Eleanora's education in what female friendship could be when it was not poisoned by competition or constrained by fear. "We lift each other up," Thea said one afternoon, and the simplicity of it nearly broke Eleanora's heart, because she had never known it could be that straightforward. There were other changes, too. Changes that happened in the quiet hours between dusk and sleep, in the space that belonged only to Eleanora and Jasper. She began reaching for his hand at the supper table without thinking about it. She began leaning into his shoulder when they sat on the porch, watching the sun go down. One evening, after a long day of hauling water and mending fence and coming inside to find he had already started supper without being asked, she crossed the kitchen and kissed him. Not on the cheek, on the mouth. Brief but deliberate, as if she were signing her name to a document she had spent weeks drafting. Jasper stood very still. a wooden spoon suspended halfway to the pot, his eyes wide with the expression of a man who had been struck by something wonderful and was not entirely sure the blow had landed. "What was that for?" he managed. "For being you," she said. "For not rushing me." The physical distance between them closed by degrees after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the incremental way that spring arrives on the prairie. A hand on a hip, a forehead resting against a shoulder, sleeping closer in the bed they shared until there was no space between them at all. She learned the landscape of his body the way she had learned the landscape of the ranch, gradually and with a curiosity that surprised them both. The scar on his left forearm from a barbed wire accident, the calluses that mapped his palms like a topographic survey of years of labor, the way his breathing changed when she touched the back of his neck. "I never thought I would want this," she told him one night, lying in the dark with his arm curved around her waist. Being touched, being close to someone. "I thought that part of me was broken." "It was not broken," Jasper said. "It was waiting." Eleanora's preserves began appearing on the shelves of Thea's store. Strawberry jam, pickled vegetables, apple butter made from fruit she traded eggs for. The first batch sold in 3 days. Thea was unsurprised. "I told you, people will buy these. You have a gift." The income was modest, but it was hers, earned by her own hands, belonging to no one but herself. The first money she had controlled since she was 16 years old. One evening, after a month of marriage, Eleanora sat by the fire while Jasper worked on accounts at the table. She watched him frown at numbers and chew the end of his pencil and push his hair back from his forehead with the distracted gesture of a man lost in thought. "What would make you happy in a marriage?" she asked. "Not the practical things. What would really make you happy?" Jasper set down his pencil. "Partnership. Someone to build with, not just beside. Conversation. Laughter when we can find it. Children, maybe, if that is something you would want someday. But mostly," he paused, "mostly I would want you to be happy here, whatever that looks like for you. And if what makes me happy is not what you expected, then we figure it out together. Marriage is not about one person surrendering to the other person's vision. It is about creating something neither of you could have imagined alone." Something inside Eleanora shifted. Not a crack this time, but a thaw. Slow and deep and irreversible, like the first warmth of spring reaching frozen ground. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October when the thaw met its first frost. Eleanora was at the general store picking up supplies when Thea pulled her behind the counter with a grip that was friendly but left no room for negotiation. The older woman's face had lost its usual warmth. In its place was something harder, something protective. "I need to tell you something," Thea said, keeping her voice low. "There was a man in here last week, asking questions about newcomers to Copper Hollow. Women specifically. Women traveling alone. What did he look like?" "Older, maybe 50. Well-dressed in a way you do not see much out here. Had the look of a man accustomed to people doing what he tells them. Said his name was Edmund." Eleanora's mouth was dry. "My uncle. He found me. I figured as much." Thea's eyes were steady and fierce. "You need to tell Jasper. Today. Whatever is coming, that man of yours needs to know about it before it arrives at your door." She found Jasper in the barn mending a saddle, When he looked up and saw her expression, he set everything down immediately. "What happened? We need to talk." She told him about Thea's warning, watched his face transform from concern to something colder and more deliberate, the look of a man assessing a threat and already calculating his response. "We go to town tomorrow," Jasper said. "We talk to Cordell Pratt. We make sure the law knows exactly who Edmund Blackwell is and what he wants." They rode into Copper Hollow the next morning side by side. Sheriff Pratt listened to the whole story in his office, his friendly face hardening into something official and serious. He confirmed what Eleanora already knew. She was an adult, married, a citizen of the territory. Edmund had no legal claim. "But that does not mean he will not try other methods," Pratt warned. "Intimidation, manipulation. If he shows up, do not talk to him alone. Make sure there are witnesses." They were stepping out of the sheriff's office into the midday sun when a voice cut across the street like a blade through silk. Eleanora. Edmund Blackwell stood in the center of Copper Hollow's main street. Tall, silver-haired, immaculately dressed in clothes that cost more than most of the buildings surrounding him, flanked by two men she did not recognize. "You have led me on quite a chase, my dear." His smile was thin and precise, like a paper cut. "But I have found you now. It is time to come home." Jasper moved to stand beside her, not in front of her, beside her. "She is home," he said. Edmund's gaze shifted to Jasper with casual contempt. "And you are?" "Jasper Calloway, Eleanora's husband." Edmund looked past Jasper to Eleanora. "She has clearly been influenced by this man. Did he force you to marry him?" But something had changed in the weeks since Eleanora had arrived in Copper Hollow. She had pulled weeds and gathered eggs and ridden through a storm and laughed in a barn and fallen asleep holding her husband's hand. She was not the same woman who had climbed onto a stagecoach in Boston. "No one forced me." Her voice gained strength as it traveled. "I married Jasper because I chose to. I left Boston because you were cruel and controlling, and I was tired of being afraid in my own home." "You are speaking of family," Edmund warned. "You are not my family. You were my jailer." The crowd was gathering. Thea appeared in the doorway of her store. Pratt stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "A dozen people who owed Jasper Calloway for a rebuilt store or a long night sitting with a sick child or a wagon load of firewood delivered without being asked." "Is there a problem?" Pratt asked, and his voice had lost every ounce of friendliness. Edmund sized up the situation. He saw the faces. He counted the numbers. He calculated the odds. "This is not over," he said to Eleanora. "You are making a terrible mistake." "No," Eleanora said. "Leaving you was the first good decision I made in 5 years." Edmund turned and walked toward the hotel. The crowd watched him go in silence. Eleanora's legs gave out. Jasper caught her, his arms solid around her waist. "You did it," he said quietly. "You stood up to him." "We did it," she corrected, leaning into his strength. That night she went to Jasper's room and let him hold her while the last of the adrenaline shook its way through her body. "What if he comes back?" she whispered. "Then we face him. Together." She pressed her face against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady as the hoofbeats of a horse on good ground, and let herself believe, just for this one night, that together might be enough. But Edmund Blackwell was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who adapted. And as he sat in the Copper Hollow Hotel, composing a letter to his attorney in Boston, his strategy was already shifting from force to something far more surgical. He had her medical records from when she was 17. A grieving girl who told a doctor she could hear her dead mother's voice. It had been noted, filed, forgotten. Until now. Edmund sealed the letter and addressed it to the territorial court in Denver City. Then he poured himself a whiskey and allowed himself a small, cold smile. The girl thought she had won today. She had no idea what a real fight looked like. 3 weeks passed without a sign of Edmund Blackwell. The hotel clerk in Copper Hollow confirmed he had checked out the morning after the confrontation. Sheriff Pratt sent a telegram to a contact in Denver City who verified that a man matching Edmund's description had been seen boarding an eastbound train. The news should have brought relief. Instead, it settled over Eleanora like a held breath that refused to release. She knew her uncle. She knew the architecture of his patience. Edmund Blackwell did not retreat. He repositioned. But the days kept coming, and the ranch demanded attention regardless of what terrors might be gathering beyond the horizon. Eleanora threw herself into work with a ferocity that Jasper recognized as something more than dedication. She was building. Not just a garden or a pantry full of preserves or a reputation at Thea's store. She was building evidence of a life. Proof that she existed as a complete and competent person, in case anyone ever tried to argue otherwise. The garden produced more than they could eat. Eleanora began preserving in earnest, filling jar after jar with tomatoes and beans and pickled vegetables and fruit butters. The shelves in the root cellar filled up like a library of abundance. She kept the household accounts in a neat ledger that balanced to the penny. She rode Clover into town twice a week to deliver goods to Thea's store, where her preserves now occupied an entire shelf and sold faster than she could stock them. She was not hiding. She was planting herself so deeply into the soil of this community that no one could pull her out. Then, on a cold morning in early December, when frost painted the windows and Eleanora's breath hung in clouds as she gathered eggs, the thing she had been dreading arrived. Not Edmund himself. Something worse. Jasper had ridden to the Pratt Ranch to help the sheriff replace a section of collapsed barn roof. Eleanora was alone. She heard a single horse approaching and came around the side of the chicken coop to find her uncle dismounting at the front gate. No companions this time. No hired men flanking him. Just Edmund Blackwell in a fine wool coat, his silver hair combed smooth, his expression arranged into something that almost resembled warmth. "Eleanora," he called, his voice carrying the practiced gentleness of a man who had decided to change tactics. "I came to speak with you privately, just the two of us. Surely we can manage a civil conversation." Every instinct told her to go inside, bolt the door, wait for Jasper. But there was another voice in her now, one that had been growing stronger with every fence she mended and every jar she sealed, and every morning she woke up in a bed she had chosen. That voice said, "Do not run. You have run enough. Stand here on your own land and let him see what you have become." 5 minutes, she said. "We talk on the porch. Your horse stays at the gate." Edmund raised his hands in a gesture of surrender that fooled neither of them and walked to the porch with the unhurried stride of a man who believed he held every card in the deck. They stood facing each other across the weathered wood, and Eleanora noticed for the first time how much older he looked. The lines around his mouth had deepened. His eyes, always cold, had taken on a quality she could only describe as desperate. Edmund Blackwell was losing, and he knew it. "This is beneath you," he began. "Living on a primitive ranch, married to a man who reads at an 8th grade level. Your father would be devastated." There was a time, before the drinking took hold, when Edmund had been different. Eleanora remembered it the way one remembers a dream upon waking, fading and uncertain. Her uncle reading to her on a Sunday afternoon when she was 6, his voice warm and patient, nothing like the voice that spoke to her now. That man had died somewhere inside a bottle, and the thing that replaced him wore the same face, but none of the kindness. My father would be devastated by what you did to me. Edmund's jaw tightened, but he held his composure. I admit I was harsh at times. The drinking made me less than I should have been. But I can change, Eleanora. Come back to Boston. We will start fresh. No. Think about what you are throwing away. Society, culture, the money your father left you, the money you stole. The mask slipped, just for a heartbeat, but Eleanora saw it. The rage underneath. The same rage that had left bruises on her arms and terror in her sleep. Edmund studied her, and Eleanora watched him recalculate. She could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes, discarding one approach, selecting another. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer, almost sorrowful. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps I was wrong to come here expecting you to listen. But Eleanora, I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you told your husband everything? Everything about what? About your episodes. Edmund let the word hang in the air between them like smoke. When you were 17, after your mother died, you told Dr. Hadley that you could hear her voice, that she called to you at night. Do you remember that? I was grieving. I was a child who had lost her mother. The doctor documented it, Eleanora. It is in your medical records. A young woman experiencing auditory disturbances following emotional trauma. Edmund's voice was almost kind now, which made it infinitely more terrifying than his anger. I have those records. And I have Dr. Hadley's sworn statement that in his professional opinion, you exhibited symptoms consistent with mental instability. The ground seemed to shift beneath Eleanora's feet. She gripped the porch railing. I have already written to the territorial court in Denver City, Edmund continued. I have petitioned for a review of your mental competency. If the court agrees to hear the case, and I believe they will be required to appear for evaluation. If you refuse to appear, the court will rule in absentia. And if they find you incompetent, your marriage becomes voidable, and your financial affairs revert to the control of your nearest male relative. He paused to let the weight of it settle. That would be me. His hand moved as he spoke, rising from his side in a gesture that might have been emphasis or might have been something else entirely. Eleanora knew that gesture. She had catalogued it the way a sailor catalogues the shape of waves that precede a storm. His hand was rising, his fingers were curling. She did not flinch. She did not step back. She looked him directly in the eye and said, "No." Edmund's hand continued to rise, and then the sound of hooves pounding hard ground split the air, and Jasper Calloway came over the ridge at a full gallop. He must have seen the unfamiliar horse from the road. He was off the saddle before his horse had fully stopped, covering the distance to the porch in long strides that ate the ground beneath them. His hand closed around Edmund's wrist in midair. Not violent, not aggressive, just absolute. The way a man might catch a rattlesnake behind the head, with precision and certainty, and no intention whatsoever of letting go. "Do not," Jasper said. His voice was quiet in the way that deep water is quiet. "Do not even think about it." The two men stood frozen for a single beat. Then Jasper released him and stepped back, placing himself beside Eleanora. not in front of her. Beside her. "Leave now," Jasper said, "and do not come back to this ranch." Edmund rubbed his wrist, his face flushed with the particular humiliation of a powerful man who had been physically checked by someone he considered beneath him. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." "Neither do you," Jasper replied. Edmund straightened his coat and walked to his horse. "You will regret this. The petition is already filed. The court will send a summons. And when they do, all your little frontier friends will not be able to help you." He rode away. Eleanora watched until he was a speck on the horizon, and then nothing at all. Then her body began to shake. Not from cold. From the aftershock of standing in the blast radius of her past and refusing to be moved. Jasper's hands found her face, cupping it gently, his thumbs brushing at tears she had not realized were falling. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No. He just told me what is coming." She took a ragged breath. "He has my medical records, Jasper, from when I was 17. He is going to try to have me declared incompetent. He can try. It will not work. You do not know that. I know you. That is enough." But what Jasper did not tell her, what he held back behind his careful composure, was how close he had come to losing control on that porch. When he had seen Edmund's hand rising toward Eleanora, something ancient and terrible had ignited in his chest. Not just protectiveness, rage. The same blind, burning fury he had watched destroy his father. He had caught Edmund's wrist with precision, yes, but in the fraction of a second before training and choice intervened, he had wanted to break it, had felt the desire pulse through his arm like an electrical current. It shook him to his core. That night, after Eleanora had fallen asleep against his shoulder, Jasper sat by the window in the dark and stared at his own hands, the hands that had caught Edmund, the hands that had wanted to do more than catch. He did not tell Eleanora about the rage. He told himself it was to protect her, that she had enough fear in her life without adding the knowledge that her husband carried violence in his blood like a hereditary disease. It was the wrong decision, and he would learn that soon enough. 3 days later, over breakfast, Eleanora set down her coffee cup with the careful precision of someone preparing to detonate something. "You have been strange since Edmund left. Quiet in a way that is different from your usual quiet. Tell me what is wrong." "Nothing is wrong. Jasper Calloway, do not lie to me. I spent 5 years reading lies on a man's face. I know what they look like. And I am looking at one right now." The directness of it caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to deflect, to reassure, to protect her from the ugliness he was carrying. But her eyes were steady and fierce and demanded the one thing she had always asked of him: honesty. When I grabbed Edmund's wrist, he said slowly, "I wanted to hurt him. Not just stop him, hurt him, break something. Break. Make him feel what he had made you feel. And that scared me more than anything Edmund could do to either of us." Eleanora was quiet for a long moment. "Because of your father," she said. "Because of my father. Because the same blood runs in my veins. Because what if that is who I really am, underneath everything I have tried to build?" Eleanora reached across the table and took his hand. Having the impulse and choosing not to act on it is not the same as being your father. Your father chose violence. You chose restraint every single time. But I wanted to, and you did not. That is the difference, Jasper. That is the only difference that matters. He looked at her across the small table, and something in his chest unclenched that had been tight for days. She had not recoiled, had not looked at him with the careful wariness of someone recalculating the danger in the room. She had looked at him with the same steady trust she had been building since the day she chose to stay. "Do not hide things from me again," she said. "Even the ugly things. Especially the ugly things. I did not marry a perfect man. I married an honest one. Keep being honest." "I will," he said, and meant it. The days that followed were heavy with waiting. Then word came from Rosemary Pratt, carried by a neighbor boy on a lathered horse. Polly Sutter was in labor, alone on her homestead 8 miles north. Her husband had gone to town for supplies, and his wagon axle had broken 3 miles out. Rosemary was too far along in her own pregnancy to make the journey. There was no doctor within 50 miles. "Will you go?" Rosemary asked through the neighbor boy's relay. "She is alone, and it is her first. I would not ask if there was anyone else." Eleanora did not hesitate. She saddled Clover, packed clean cloths and water, and the few medical supplies the ranch had, and rode out with Jasper at her side. The 8 miles took over an hour through rough country, and with every mile Eleanora felt the fear of what awaited her warring with a purpose so strong it overrode everything else. A woman was alone. A woman needed help. That was enough. The Sutter homestead was barely more than a rough cabin and a struggling garden. Polly's screams could be heard before they dismounted. "Go to her," Jasper said. "I will keep watch outside." Eleanora entered the dim cabin and found Polly on a narrow bed, drenched in sweat, her face contorted with pain and terror. "Oh, thank God," Polly gasped between contractions. "I thought I would have to do this alone." "You are not alone," Eleanora said with a steadiness that surprised her. "I am here. I am not leaving." She washed her hands. She remembered everything Rosemary had told her about birth during their sewing circles. The signs to watch for, the dangers, the things that could go wrong, and the few things that could be done about them on a frontier without a doctor. The labor lasted through the afternoon and into evening. Hours of pain and fear, and the relentless machinery of biology. Eleanora held Polly's hand, wiped her forehead, talked her through contractions with a calm she manufactured from somewhere deep and previously untapped. "I cannot do this," Polly sobbed during a contraction that arched her back off the bed. "I cannot. It hurts too much." "You can. You are already doing it. You are the strongest person in this room right now, Polly. I need you to believe that." As the sun set and filled the cabin with amber light, Polly's baby entered the world. A tiny girl with clenched fist and powerful lungs who announced her existence with a cry that shattered the silence of the prairie like a bell. Eleanora wrapped the infant in clean cloth and placed her on her mother's chest. Polly wept with a joy so fierce it was almost indistinguishable from the pain that had preceded it. "You did it," Eleanora whispered, and her own eyes were streaming. "You were so brave." She cleaned the baby, checked her breathing, counted her fingers and toes with the meticulous attention of someone who understood that details mattered. She changed the sheets beneath Polly while the new mother lay in the trembling aftermath of effort, and she brewed tea from the dried chamomile she had thought to pack because Rosemary had once mentioned it helped with afterbirth pains. Every action was deliberate. Every decision was sound. She was not performing competence. She was living it. Polly's husband arrived an hour later, bursting through the cabin door to find his wife and newborn daughter, and dropped to his knees beside the bed with tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "Eleanora was here," Polly told him. "She saved us. She kept me breathing when I wanted to stop. I could not have done it without her." On the ride home, full darkness had fallen, and they navigated by moonlight and the horse's instinct for familiar ground. Eleanora was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. She felt hollowed out and filled up simultaneously. She had held a life in her hands tonight. She had been the only thing standing between a young mother and catastrophe, and she had not wavered. Not once. The girl who had once been told she was too fragile to manage her own finances had just delivered a baby on a frontier homestead with nothing but clean cloths and steady hands and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. "You did something extraordinary today," Jasper said. "I was terrified every single moment, but you did it anyway. That is what courage looks like." Eleanora thought about that as Clover picked her way through the moonlit grass. She had been making that decision every day since she stepped off that stagecoach. Every time she chose to trust instead of retreat. Every time she opened a door instead of locking it. Edmund's petition claimed she was mentally unfit, but the women of Copper Hollow had just watched her save a life. January arrived with a brutality that made December feel like an overture. But before the cold came, there was Christmas. Thea organized a dinner at the Weaver store, tables pushed together and covered with mismatched cloths, the room warm with bodies and candlelight, and the smell of roasted goose and cinnamon. Everyone came, Pratt with Rosemary and their 2 children climbing on everything. Harlan and Opal Kincaid moving slowly but missing nothing. Polly and her husband with the baby bundled in the quilt Opal had made, the little girl now 3 months old and already showing her mother's determination in the set of her jaw. Silas Weaver played fiddle in the corner while his wife directed the evening like a conductor who happened to also be the orchestra. After dinner, while the children drowsed and the adults sat heavy with food and contentment, Jasper leaned close to Eleanora and said, "Pucker your lips, like you are blowing out a candle, but tighter." "What? You said you could not whistle." "I said I would teach you." Eleanora laughed. "Now? In front of everyone? Best audience you will ever have. They are all too full to judge." She tried. The sound that emerged was less whistle and more wind through a broken fence. Thea looked over with raised eyebrows. Polly grinned. Opal said, "That is terrible," with the frank authority of a woman who had never seen the point of dishonesty. Eleanora tried again. This time, a thin, wavering note emerged. Barely a whistle. More a ghost of one, but real. Her eyes went wide. Jasper smiled. The full, unguarded smile she had seen only a handful of times. The one that made him look like a man who had forgotten, just for a moment, to be careful with joy. "There it is," he said. That Christmas night, riding home under stars so thick they looked like spilled flour across a dark table, Eleanora leaned against Jasper's shoulder and watched her breath make clouds in the cold air. "I am happy," she said, not beginning to learn what happy feels like. Actually happy. Jasper pressed his lips to the top of her head. "Me too." It was the last warm night before the world turned cold. Snow buried the prairie in drifts that reached the windowsills, and temperatures dropped so far below zero that the well froze and had to be thawed each morning with kettles of boiling water. Jasper worked from first light to last darkness, keeping the cattle alive, breaking ice on water sources, hauling feed through snow that reached his thighs. The blizzard hit 3 days after Christmas. Snow fell so thick that the barn disappeared behind a wall of white. Wind screamed against the house with a sound like tearing metal, finding every gap, every weakness, every seam that summer had left unprepared for this kind of assault. The air inside smelled of wood smoke and the sharp, metallic scent that preceded the worst cold, a scent like the earth itself was bracing. Frost crept across the inside of the windows in patterns that looked like the skeletons of ferns, beautiful and merciless. Jasper went out to check the cattle at noon. He did not come back. 1 hour passed. 2, 3. Eleanora paced the house, counting minutes, counting heartbeats, counting the distance between hope and catastrophe. The baby in her womb, still too new to be anything more than a suspicion and a missed cycle and a tenderness in her breasts, seemed to pulse with its own small alarm. She had been quiet about her suspicion, had not told Jasper yet, had wanted to be sure before she gave him something to hope for or fear. But now, standing at the window watching snow erase the world, the possibility of what she carried made the absence of the man who had helped create it unbearable. Eleanora pulled on every piece of warm clothing she owned. She tied a rope around her waist and secured the other end to the porch post, the technique Jasper had taught her during the first snowfall. Then she opened the door and walked into the teeth of the storm. The wind hit her like a living thing. Snow drove into her face with the force of thrown gravel. She could not see, could not hear, could only feel the rope feeding out behind her and the frozen ground beneath her boots, and the absolute necessity of moving forward. She found him collapsed against a fence post, half buried in a drift. His face was gray. His lips were blue. Snow had packed into the creases of his clothing like a burial shroud being fitted in advance. Eleanora dropped to her knees beside him and shook his shoulder. "Jasper, wake up. Please wake up." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dim. "Eleanora, you should not be out here. Neither should you. Get up. Help me. You have to stand." Between them, leaning on each other with the desperate collaboration of two people refusing to let the other fall, they followed the rope back through the white blindness of the storm. Each step was an act of will. Each breath was a negotiation with air that did not want to be breathed. Eleanora bore his weight against her shoulder and felt her own body screaming with effort and cold and something more primal than either. They reached the house, collapsed through the doorway together, lay gasping on the floor while snow melted around them in spreading puddles. "You saved my life," Jasper said through teeth that chattered so violently the words barely formed. "Do not talk." Eleanora was already stripping off his frozen clothing, wrapping him in blankets, building the fire until the room blazed with heat. She made coffee so hot it steamed like a living thing and held the cup to his lips when his hands shook too badly to hold it. "I thought I lost you," she said, and the tears came then, hot against her frozen cheeks. "I thought our baby would grow up never knowing its father." The words left her mouth before she could catch them. She felt them land in the silence between them like a stone dropped into still water. Jasper went very still. His eyes, which had been glazed with cold and exhaustion, suddenly sharpened. "Baby? I am not certain yet, but I think so. I have been tired in a way that is different from just work, and my cycle is late, and the smell of coffee makes me ill now, which has never happened before. How long? A few weeks, maybe 6 or 7. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Jasper stared at her, and then something broke open in his face that Eleanora had never seen before. Not a smile. Something bigger and more devastating than a smile. Something that looked like every wall he had ever built crumbling simultaneously. And then he was crying. Not the restraint and moisture of a man who permits himself a single tear. Real crying. His shoulders shaking, his breath coming in ragged pulls, his face buried against Eleanora's neck as 5 years of loneliness and 4 years of building alone and a lifetime of wondering whether he would ever have someone to build for came pouring out of him in a flood that could not be stopped and should not have been. "I was so scared," he choked out. "Not just today, every day. Scared that this was too good, that I did not deserve it, that something would take it away." Eleanora held him, her hands in his hair, her cheek against the top of his head, her body wrapped around his shaking frame, like a shelter she was building in real time. She understood what was happening. This was his breaking point, the place where strength could no longer hold, and vulnerability rushed in to fill the space. "You are not your father," she whispered. "You are nothing like your father. A man who builds a home and gives a stranger a locked door and teaches her to ride so she can be free, that man deserves everything. Everything, Jasper, including this." He pulled back and looked at her with red eyes and a face stripped of every defense he had ever constructed. "You really think so?" "I know so." They held each other through the night while the blizzard raged outside and the fire burned low and the world reduced itself to the size of 2 people and the beginning of a third. Jasper's hand found its way to Eleanora's stomach, resting there with a tenderness so acute it made her chest ache. "I love you," she said. The first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. "Say it again." "I love you, Jasper Calloway." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you too. I think I loved you from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified but trying so hard to be brave." Eleanora pulled back and looked at him, at the face she had chosen, at the man who had given her a key and a horse and a garden and never once asked for anything in return except her honesty. She thought about all the doors she had locked and all the walls she had built and all the years she had spent believing that intimacy was just another word for danger. "I am not afraid anymore," she said. "Not of you, not of this." She kissed him. Not the careful, tentative kisses they had shared before. Something deeper. Something that came from the place inside her that had been locked for 5 years and was finally, irrevocably open. His hands moved to her waist, then her back, then her hair, and she did not pull away, did not brace, did not inventory exits. She leaned into him the way she leaned into Clover when the horse galloped, trusting the strength beneath her to hold. What followed was tender and awkward and imperfect in all the ways that mattered. They fumbled with buttons and blankets and the logistics of 2 bodies learning each other for the first time. Jasper asked permission at every threshold, and Eleanora gave it freely, not from obligation, but from desire. Her own desire. A thing she had believed was dead and had discovered was merely dormant, waiting for soil safe enough to bloom in. Afterward, they lay tangled together under every blanket they owned, and she pressed her ear to his chest and listened to his heartbeat, rapid and then gradually slowing, and felt his hand trace circles on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am more than all right." They fell asleep like that, and the storm could not touch them, and the cold could not reach them, and for one perfect, suspended night, Nothing in the world existed except the two of them and the future growing quietly between them. But morning brought more than sunlight. Morning brought a letter. Jasper found it in the mailbox at the end of the ranch road, delivered by the mail carrier who had somehow navigated the storm's aftermath to complete his route. The envelope bore the seal of the territorial court in Denver City. Inside was a formal summons requiring Eleanora Calloway, née Blackwell, to appear before a judicial review panel for the purpose of evaluating her mental competency as petitioned by her nearest living relative, Mr. Edmund Blackwell of Boston, Massachusetts. The hearing was set for February. Eleanora read the letter 3 times. Then she set it on the kitchen table and looked at Jasper, and in her eyes was not the fear he expected, but something harder and brighter and far more dangerous. "He wants a fight," she said. "Then we give him one." Eleanora Calloway did not ride to Denver City. She brought Denver City to Copper Hollow. In the weeks following the summons, the women of Copper Hollow organized themselves with the quiet efficiency of an army that had been waiting for a war worth fighting. Thea Weaver closed the general store for 3 afternoons and sat at Eleanora's kitchen table composing a comprehensive record of Eleanora's life in Copper Hollow. Every jar of preserves sold with dates and amounts, every account balanced in precise handwriting, every egg collected and dollar earned and transaction recorded in the ledger she kept with the discipline of a woman who understood that numbers were a language courts could not ignore. Rosemary Pratt wrote a statement 3 pages long detailing Eleanora's character. Polly Sutter wrote in rough, uneven hand that carried the weight of absolute conviction. "This woman rode 8 miles through rough country to deliver my baby when no one else could come. She kept her head when I was screaming. She put my daughter in my arm." If that is what mental incompetence looks like, then the word has lost all meaning. Opal Kincaid produced exactly 2 sentences. "Eleanora Calloway is the most capable young woman I have met in 63 years. Anyone who claims otherwise is either a liar or a fool." Sheriff Pratt compiled everything and added his own report documenting Edmund's confrontations, the trespassing, the raised hand Jasper had intercepted. But before sealing the packet, he added one final piece: a telegram from a colleague in Boston. Pratt had sent the inquiry weeks earlier through the network of law officers who communicated across state lines. The response revealed what Edmund had been desperate to hide. He was under investigation in Massachusetts for systematic embezzlement from multiple estates he had been appointed to oversee. 3 other wards had come forward. Lawyers were building a case. The authorities wanted very much to speak with Eleanora about her own experience. Edmund had not come to Colorado to protect his niece. He had come to silence a witness. Pratt sent the full packet to Denver City by express courier. Then he sent a telegram directly to Edmund's hotel. Petition evidence forwarded to court. Additional materials from Boston included. Recommend you consult your own attorney. Regards, Sheriff C. Pratt. 9 days later, the court's response arrived. Petition dismissed. The judge's notation was pointed. Petitioner's claims unsupported. Respondent's community standing well documented. Court notes with concern. Petitioner's own pending legal matters in Massachusetts. Case closed. But Eleanora wanted more than a dismissed petition. She wanted an ending. She asked Pratt to send one final message. "Come to Copper Hollow. We finish this face to face, or I send everything to Boston." Edmund came on a Tuesday morning in late February. Eleanora met him in Sheriff Pratt's office, not on her porch, not in the street, in the seat of law. Jasper beside her, Pratt behind his desk, Thea near the door. Eleanora did not raise her voice, did not cry, did not tremble. You are going to sign a document relinquishing all claims to me, my marriage, and my inheritance. You are going to leave today. You are going to return to Boston and face whatever is waiting. And you are never going to contact me again. And if I refuse, then everything goes to Boston. The financial records I kept as a girl, showing where my father's money went. The testimony of 3 other wards. My sworn statement about 5 years of abuse with dates and names. You are bluffing. Try me. Edmund looked around the room. At the sheriff, at the shopkeeper, at the rancher, at the faces through the window. He saw no allies, no leverage, no angle that had not already been neutralized. Across from him sat the girl he had once controlled with a raised hand and a cold voice, and her eyes held no fear at all. He signed. The pen scratched against the paper in a sound that was neither loud nor dramatic, but that Eleanora would remember for the rest of her life. Pratt witnessed it. Thea witnessed it. Jasper witnessed it. 4 signatures on a piece of paper that weighed almost nothing and meant almost everything. Edmund stood, buttoned his coat with the mechanical precision of a man whose hands no longer served his will, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at Eleanora one final time. Your father would be ashamed of you. My father would be proud, Eleanora said, and we both know it. Edmund walked to his horse, mounted with the stiffness of a man who had aged 10 years in a single morning, and rode east without looking back. Eleanora stood in the doorway of the sheriff's office and watched him grow smaller against the white expanse of winter prairie. Watched until he crested the far ridge and disappeared over the other side. Watched until the dust of his departure had settled and there was nothing left of Edmund Blackwell in Copper Hollow but the memory of what he had tried to do and the document that proved he had failed. Her knees buckled then. Jasper caught her the way he always caught her, with hands that were steady and open and never once demanding. She pressed her face against his chest and breathed him in, leather and wood smoke and the clean cold scent of Colorado winter, and let herself believe, without reservation, without the whispered caveat of maybe, that she was free. Thea appeared beside them and placed a hand on Eleanora's shoulder. That man was a rattlesnake in a good suit, she said. And you just pulled his fangs. Eleanora laughed through her tears. It was an ugly sound, raw and graceless, and it was the most honest noise she had made in years. Spring came early. Snow melted in long, slow retreats. The creek ran high and fast with water that tasted of mountain stone, and green spread across the valley in patches that grew daily until the whole world was alive again. Eleanora's belly grew with the season, rounding beneath her dresses in a way that made Jasper's eyes go soft every time he looked at her. He built a cradle from pine wood in the barn during the evenings, sanding each surface until it was smooth enough to press against an infant's cheek. He did not tell Eleanora about it, but she found it one morning when she went to feed the horses, covered with a cloth, but unmistakable. She stood in the barn with her hand on the tiny railing, and wept in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. The women rallied around her as the months progressed. Thea stocked the store with everything a baby might need and refused to let Eleanora pay for any of it. Rosemary, whose own 3rd child was now crawling and pulling himself up on furniture, shared wisdom about labor and nursing and the particular exhaustion of new motherhood. Polly brought her daughter to every sewing circle, and the little girl slept in Eleanora's arms while the women worked, and the weight of that small body against her chest felt like a rehearsal for the life about to begin. Opal Kincaid knitted enough blankets and garments for triplets and delivered them with her characteristic brevity. "Baby will need warmth. Here is warmth." "No woman should face this alone," Thea said during one of her visits, watching Eleanora fold a stack of impossibly small clothing. "And no woman in this community ever will." The baby came in September, 1 year to the week after Eleanora had stepped off the stagecoach. The labor began before dawn with a pain that wrapped around her lower back like a belt being tightened by invisible hands. Jasper rode to town for Thea while Rosemary and Opal arrived from their ranches, summoned by the network of neighbors that functioned better than any telegraph. The labor was long and hard, hours of it. The kind of pain that erased everything except the present moment and the body enduring it. Thea held one hand. Jasper held the other. Rosemary coached her through breathing. Opal boiled water and prepared cloths with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had seen this before and knew that calm was the most useful thing anyone could bring to a birthing room. When the difficulty came, when the baby would not move and Eleanora's strength was failing, and the room grew quiet with the particular silence that precedes either miracle or tragedy, Jasper leaned close and spoke into her ear. "You are the strongest person I know. You rode through a blizzard to save my life. You told a powerful man you were not afraid. One more time. Be brave. One more time." She pushed, and a sound filled the room that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "It is a girl," Thea said, her voice breaking. "A perfect little girl. They named her Miriam. Miri. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's fierce eyes." Jasper held his daughter with hands that trembled for the first time in his life. "She is perfect," he whispered. "We made her," Eleanora said. "Together." On the dresser, her mother's poetry book stood beside the daguerreotype of her parents and the wedding photograph Silas Weaver had taken. 2 generations of love, side by side. And next to them, Jasper's worn copy of Whitman, open to the page where he had once underlined, "I am large. I contain multitudes." Beneath the old pencil mark, in newer, steadier handwriting, he had added a single line. "She showed me what that means. Edmund Blackwell died of a stroke in December, alone in the Boston townhouse that had once belonged to Eleanora's father." The letter from the attorney arrived on a Tuesday, carried by the same mail carrier who had delivered the court summons nearly a year before. Eleanora read it while nursing Miri in the rocking chair that faced the sunset. The rocking chair where she had sat on her very first evening in this house, wondering if she would ever feel safe. She waited for something to move inside her. Grief, perhaps, or satisfaction, or the complicated relief that comes when a source of long suffering finally ceases to exist. But what she felt was simply distance, as if the letter described events in a country she had once visited but would never return to. Edmund Blackwell had controlled 5 years of her life through fear and manipulation and the systematic abuse of power. Now he was gone, and she was still here, on a ranch in Colorado, with a husband who loved her, and a daughter who had her mother's fierce eyes, and a community that had fought for her when she could not fight alone. That was enough. That was everything. "Sell whatever remains," she told Jasper that evening. "The house, the furniture, all of it. Put the money in trust for Miri and for any other children we might have. I do not want it touching our life here." "Are you sure?" "That money could make things easier." We do not need easier. We have enough. Eleanora looked out at the ranch, at the barn, at the garden sleeping under its first dusting of snow, at the life she had built with her own hands. This is ours. I will not let anything from that world contaminate it. The idea for Haven House grew from the sewing circle the following spring. As naturally as the wildflowers that return to the prairie each year. It began with a conversation about a woman in the next county whose husband had broken her arm and who had nowhere to go. It became a plan. A place where women running from the lives Eleanora had run from could find shelter, skills, community, choice. Not charity. Possibility. Harlan Kincaid donated a parcel of land at the edge of town. The men of Copper Hollow donated labor, raising walls and roofing beams the same way they had built Jasper's house years ago, together, under open sky. Eleanora donated Edmund's money, every cent of it, and the irony was not lost on her. The fortune he had used to cage her was now building doors for other women to walk through. His legacy of control transformed into its exact opposite. The first woman arrived on a warm May morning, 19 years old, black eye, carpet bag. The particular stillness of someone who had learned that making yourself small was the safest way to survive. Eleanora took her hand. Welcome. You are safe now. How do you know? Because I stood where you are standing, and I found my way through. She gave the girl her old carpet bag, the one she had carried across a continent. You will not need it for long. But let it remind you that traveling light is not the same as having nothing. On a summer evening, Miri almost won the Prairie Gold with late light. Eleanora stood at the fence with Jasper's arms around her waist. If you could tell that woman on the stagecoach one thing, he said, what would it be? That love does not have to hurt. That choosing yourself is not selfish. And that everything she is running toward is worth the risk of hope. The sun touched the mountains. Miri laughed inside the house. The creek caught the last light and held it. Are you here because you want to be? The same question. The first question. The only question that had ever mattered. Eleanora turned and looked at the face she had chosen. The face she would keep choosing every morning for the rest of her life. There is nowhere else I would rather be.